Hello from Diplomatic Language Services, and welcome to our podcast, Language Matters. We make language accessible to everyday people by discussing features which may not exist in other languages. I'm your host, Molly Sampson. Hello, and welcome to the 5th episode of Language Matters. Today we are talking about Italian, and I have two native Italian speakers with me. First one is our Romance language training supervisor, Simona Westlin. Hi, Simona.
Hi, Molly.
And I also have the other Simona Gentile. She is our language training coordinator, also for the Romance department, of course, with a romantic language like Italian. Hi, Simona.
Hi,
Other
how are you?
Simona? No, that's me. I won't call you. I'll just call you the Simonas.
Okay.
First of all, tell me where you guys are from in Italy so we know kind of where we're talking about regional dialects from.
So I am originally from Sardinia, so one of the islands in Italy. I have lived in other parts of Italy, but my language would be related to that area.
I'm from Abruzzo, which is center. It's a region across from the capital, Rome, on the Adriatic coast, and the local language or dialect is the center dialect, the Napolitan. very
Okay,
close
so
to
the
Napolitan area.
standard dialect.
Yes.
So first we're going to talk a little bit about difficult things for English speakers mainly to do or to learn in Italian. What makes it difficult?
So one is that probably we can distinguish between two groups of difficulties. One group would be the ones that are in common with the other Romance languages, so like with the mostly Spanish, Portuguese, and French, and the other ones instead would pertain only to Italian. So for the more generic ones, there's the fact obviously that we have a gender, so like nouns are either masculine or feminine. So sometimes our students, English native speakers, have a hard time remembering, first of all, what gender a certain noun is, and then remembering to do an agreement of the articles and the adjectives to the right gender or number.
And like other Romance languages, you only have two genders, right?
Correct.
You don't have the neutral.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So verb conjugations, of course, that's typically like all the Latin-derived languages.
Yeah, specifically
Yeah.
Possibly like past
The
tenses.
past tense, the use of the auxiliary verbs, other moods of the verb like the subjunctive that we don't have in English. So, and then
We have, but don't use.
don't use, yeah. And then specifically for Italian, we were thinking, to mention the pronouns, the indirect and direct object pronouns that we combine together in one word. And also we position the pronoun before the verb. So
Okay, let's back up a little bit
Yeah.
because it doesn't mean much to people who don't know things about language. So in English, what you're talking about is a sentence that would be, I gave him a gift. Oh, or I
Exactly.
gave it to him,
uh-huh.
right? And so then what do you guys do with the pronouns in that sentence?
The two words that we combine are lo, the object pronoun,
Which is it or him?
It.
Okay.
to him, right? To glielo. Glielo would be one word that contains both.
And then you move it in,
And then you
in
put
front
it
of the verb.
correct,
So
the
it will
verb.
go subject,
Yes.
object, verb.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so like
So-
I remember once like I heard like a teacher that was mentioning that said this sentence and sticked with me about a foreigner speaking Italian can be near native. And you would still be able to recognize that he's not an Italian native speaker by the use of the pronouns. So, like, I would say pronouns and preposition is one of those super hot
Prepositions.
topic and challenging areas of the grammar that even more advanced students will struggle with.
But other Romance languages don't combine them, but they do move that object pronoun before the verb sometimes, right?
Sometimes.
In other Romance languages.
In French, they do it.
They do it as
Yeah.
well.
Okay, I think we also talked a little bit about pronunciation before. What do native English speakers usually find difficult when they're pronouncing sounds in Italian?
I would say that probably Italian is one of the easiest Romance languages for American students to pronounce correctly and to learn how to pronounce. There are a couple of sounds, though, that are still challenging. There's a couple sounds that don't exist in English, and would be the ñ sound, the GN, and the y.
Is it like gnocchi?
Correct, yes. And the y, GL sound. So both sounds are in Spanish with the L
And one's
the
GN and one's GL?
Correct,
Okay.
yes. And then otherwise, like, you pretty much would pronounce what you see written. So it doesn't present as many challenges in pronunciation as maybe French does.
I see.
Yeah,
I see.
the R, for example, like in Spanish, rolled R is, kind of challenging for students to pronounce correctly. They have to practice often.
Or even like words with a lot of vowels in it. So like whenever there's not consonants and like there's more than one syllable with multiple vowel in it, normally students have a hard time pronouncing them.
So how many vowels would you find in a row?
We could have up to 4 vowels.
Yeah,
so
the aiuola example.
Yeah, is one.
Okay.
So in that case, usually students tend to kind of go one by one, read very slowly so that they don't, skip the sound vowels in between.
And those of you that were not in the room with us right now, I was like trying to reprimand Simona to move her hands away from her mouth so she'd be closer to the microphone. So we had a lot of questions about gestures and things like that in Italian. You're stereotypically famous for using your hands and gesturing a lot. Would you say that's true, or is that just a stereotype?
Well, I think it's true. I think it's true. Obviously, I notice also in other cultures they use gestures when they speak, but it's more to accompany what they're saying. Sometimes in Italian we substitute words with specific gestures to communicate, hunger, being hungry, feelings, frustration. So,
for example, what's frustrated?
Like, for example, when we see someone who's doing something crazy, I do like this to indicate that
she just motioned with her hand like she's saluting something, or knocking your head with your hand.
Knocking my head, saying, the brain is not working, the person is crazy.
Right.
Or to express that we're enjoying something that we're eating, we touch our cheek or we do other gestures that indicates, that's really good, and things like that. So we substitute, the language,
with
the
a gesture.
Yeah, with a gesture to communicate. Yeah, so that's peculiar.
In the beginning, I asked you where you were from, but can we go in a little more depth on the different variations of Italian or even different languages? Most people think of standard Italian as what you were describing before. Is your standard?
My dialect is from the Napolitan.
Yeah.
This derives from that area, so I'm able to, understand most of the languages in the central, like Roman, Napolitan, and the regions that are surrounding my region. But then, obviously, if someone is speaking in Milanese dialect or Sicilian, that I will struggle.
Can you understand when Simona speaks the Sardinian dialect?
Maybe a few words, but that's another dialect that, no, I'm not really familiar.
Yeah.
Simona,
I think my example is an extreme.
Well, let's talk about the extreme then. That's interesting too. So would you consider Sardinian a different language?
Yes. So it's one of the Italian dialects that normally not all linguists can agree, but normally there's a couple of Italian dialects that are officially considered languages. And Sardinian is one of them because it has so much influence from Latin and Spanish. So when I would speak my dialect, people from other parts of Italy have a very hard time. Like I normally can, all the other dialects would have some words that are different, or the pronunciation of some words might be different, but still they're not going to have a different like grammar and different the differences are not that strong.
Extreme.
Yeah.
Some dialects are are, more, distant from the standard Italian.
Yeah.
My dialect is much closer. So if I speak dialect, I think, a lot of people are able to figure it out what I'm saying.
And I think it might be interesting also for Americans to realize that up to the unification of Italy, like all the different regions were speaking their own dialects. So like the Italian language is not that old. It's something that through
what is not that old? Do you know when?
Yeah, so, well, if we talk about unification, then we're going back to the 1800s.
1861 is when, 71 actually, Italy was unified, but the Italian as a standard language started to spread only after the Second World War, when the public school system was introduced. So
and the televisions in the houses.
And the television.
I see.
So, but before that, people would speak their own dialect.
Yeah.
Since Sardinian is considered a different language, what language did you go to school in? Were you speaking standard Italian or were you speaking Sardinian?
Standard Italian.
I see.
Yeah. Unfortunately, with my generation, I would say probably starting from my generation, because still my parents would use Italian probably only in school, and still in your normal everyday life you would use Sardinian, versus kind of like it flipped with my generation where and now Sardinian it's more considered as the language you speak with your grandparents.
Right,
and
right.
In certain areas there are some pockets in the island where still even children learn and speak Sardinian, but it's becoming almost like a risk of becoming an endangered language. Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, do you speak Sardinian or Italian to your daughter?
Italian.
Okay.
Yeah. We're not complicating it at this point. She's already exposed to English and Italian, so she hears some words in Sardinian, but
I'm sure when she travels back home, she'll be exposed to the language.
yes, of course.
So she will pick up some.
I think you mentioned before also that when we talk about Italian words that have infiltrated English, those are often from dialects. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the Americanized Italian words and where they came from?
Yeah, probably we're going back to, again, end of the 1800s, beginning of 1900s, when a lot of Italian immigrants arrived. They were coming from two specific areas, like Sicily and the Naples area. So a lot of words that second-generation Italian Americans learned from the parents and thought that were Italian was actually like dialect.
I see.
So they grew up and they still sometimes when they meet us, like they want to speak Italian and they use some words that
we're not familiar with sometimes. Or
so can you tell what words specifically?
Well, I hear often this word Paisan. And then,
And I don't know what that means in either language.
Paisan means someone from your own town that you meet in a different environment. So, you call that Paisan because it's someone that you identify with. And so it's automatically your friend and family.
But you guys have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
It's an Italian word, but we don't use
dialect.
it.
It's more Napolitan. We don't use it like they use it here. Or,
in the movies you would see.
Yeah, you hear a Capisce sometimes, and that's another dialect
word. Because like you would say, in Italian you would say like, to ask like, did you understand? You would say, hai capito. And instead like, it's capisce.
The dialect word drops the ending. And so that is the case with this word.
And since we're talking about words, we always ask about modern day words and what you do with words that are universal. I mean, I think Google was an example, but a lot of it is related to technology. What do you do with modern day words that are mostly usually in English or come from an English background? What does Italian do with them?
Well, unfortunately, they're introducing more and more English words. So even for words that we have.
So what are some examples?
For example, to identify an article, they're describing a killing, so they use the word killer rather than the Italian equivalent.
I see.
So that process is, happening more and more in so many areas, not just technology.
The roles in a company, you were saying that
the CEO instead of
you just use CEO.
Yeah, they're using, and that's new because I've never heard it before, but I guess.
But you don't say CEO. You say in Italian, do you?
I don't know if they kind of imitate the correct words. Obviously, we have a specific term for that.
Do you say it in Italian or do you say it in English?
I think they try to imitate the English pronunciation.
Yeah,
So
and this is a
kind of
new
an
thing.
Italian
So like it's something that she observed last time she went to Italy, but
I see.
it wouldn't be like it never happened to me to hear that specific one. But otherwise, I think older infiltration of the language, you had more Italians just adapting the pronunciation with reading the letters in Italian, and instead today I think they try to be
a little bit more
professional, like or like sounding fancy, yes,
sounding, yeah.
and so
because
they,
English is very fancy. So.
yeah, you try to sound fancy when you're using English words in Italy.
I see.
But often they're mispronounced or they're wrong. So.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that I think in France, and I don't know if in other countries, there is this attempt to limit the amount of foreign words used, like to protect the purity of the language, and that's definitely not an issue in Italy at all.
I see.
Because France is very nationalist, Italians are not. So.
Yes.
Well, I like to end with maybe an interesting idiom or an interesting proverb or something like that that maybe has cultural significance to you guys.
Maybe like
we have so many, right? We have so many proverbs related to everyday life with foods and related to religion. So for example, to identify someone that is a very good person, we use the bread as a symbol, and we say he is as good as bread, buono come il pane. So we use
that's a high compliment because bread is really delicious. Yeah. So
yeah, exactly. So that's a symbol of food and
or we say, for example, it is like parsley, it's on everything. So like for
something that's everywhere.
Yes. So, and that's also connected with the fact that parsley is an ingredient we use a lot. Otherwise, if I just translate it in English, sometimes Americans don't understand what that means because that's not the use of parsley that you guys do as much as we do.
Right.
And I don't know if in English you have an equivalent, but we often say speak like you eat. So the meaning is that, if you're speaking in a too fancy way and people cannot really understand what you're saying.
I see.
So they would please speak as naturally as you would eat. Okay. Just make yourself.
In Italian, how would you?
Parla come mangi, in 3 words.
I might start using that just not in Italian.
If
in
someone's
English,
trying to show off and speak, too complicated and you're not able to follow, then you say, "Oh, please."
Yes, and maybe like another example of an interesting proverb that we have, that you have an equivalent in English, but I always laugh and I think like you took the stronger...
the more aggressive way?
The more aggressive way of describing the same thing. It's when in English you say to kill 2 birds with a stone, right? With one stone. And so instead we're milder and we're just like catching 2 pigeons with 1 fava bean. So like we say prendere 2 piccioni con una fava. So I like sometimes to just translate Italian proverbs in English and see the reaction of Americans, that sometimes they understand the meaning, but they think that it's hilarious the way that we
the image of it is quite funny.
Yes,
it is. With a bean. So, well, grazie for your time, Simonas, and that's the end of our podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Language Matters. To our listeners, you can continue the conversation by tweeting us at DiplomaticLS, or you can find us on Facebook by searching for Diplomatic Language Services.